Okay. Not see. I'm just waiting for Khali to say it's live, but I haven't received a message yet.
It is.
Is it? Okay, then let's start. Good evening and welcome to our first LinkedIn Live. My name is Shireen Motara and this is the Executive Elevation Experience, Stories of Women's Executive Journeys. And tonight our first guest is Sibongile Khumalo. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Shireen, for having me. Good evening, everyone.
And before we start, I'd just like to say a little bit about who I am and more about our guest. My name is Shireen Motara, and I'm an executive coach for women leaders. I'm also a gender specialist that works with different companies and development agencies to advance gender equality. And as I normally tell everyone, I exist to make women's lives better. Sibongile, do you want to say a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, thanks, Shireen. I think generally I would introduce myself as the executive director of the Learning Trust, but that's too boring for this platform. So I'll say that I am an education enthusiast and activist. I'm also, I'm child free, but I consider myself a caregiver to lots of young people. I'm also a fierce female leader in my space, and in that role, I also see myself as an instigator and enabler of other people. So I often challenge myself to warm the seat at the table for other women by investing in them, mentoring them, and guiding them. So yeah, that's who I am.
Thanks so much. So you and I know each other a little bit, but I know from what you've told me that your leadership journey was partly a reluctant one, but also one where others saw your leadership potential and wanted to give you a platform. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? What is it that you think they saw in you, and how did that help you in your leadership journey?
Yeah, you used the word reluctant, and I think some of my initial reluctance was probably based on my desire to always be part of the action. Doing work on the ground, I'm generally drawn to programmatic work and engaging directly with young people, especially. And of course, this starts to happen less and less when you step into executive shoes. But over time, I had to promise myself to stay connected to young people and that work through other things like running youth development workshops, retreats, that sort of thing. But by far the biggest reluctance probably came from a place of fear. And you know that I'm a perfectionist by nature, and so I set very high standards for myself and for other people. And I think early in my career, I saw leadership as a destination, a place to arrive at, which at 28, when I was first offered the opportunity to step into CEO shoes, I didn't believe I was at that place, right? So I also think I witnessed leadership sitting uncomfortably with some of my managers and other leaders of organizations. And I think I internalized much of that. And so it put me off of, CEO-ship. But over the years, I've had many people encourage me to take the plunge, including my first director that I worked under, Heather Cooper, who I feel trusted me and gave me a lot of autonomy in my work. And I didn't understand why until I was mentored by Teresa Clark, who actually started naming my specific personality and behavior traits that I started to believe and see myself as a leader. And she showed me specifically that my analytical ability, for one, was key to solving problems and taking concrete and informed decisions. And secondly, that my adaptability was necessary for navigating difficulties and uncertainty and just staying focused on the big goal. And that the fact that I was, always throwing myself into the action also meant that I led from a place of, passion and contextual relevance, I think. So those are the three things that I now consider my superpowers, the ability to analyze, adapt, and act. And I think they've also made me a more connected, big picture thinker.
Yeah, that's quite illuminating. Tell me a little bit about how you have navigated that fear and what it is you do when you have that fear in the moment. How do you break through it?
So I think my fear shows up as anxiety mostly on a daily basis. I'm just generally quite an anxious person. I've got generalized anxiety disorder. And so, I've had panic attacks in the past, and I just feel very nervous, especially on platforms like this. But you know what? It's the little things. I take certain things to calm me down. I'm obsessed with essential oils, so I do mixes of essential oils to calm me down, which I did now with a bit of a routine. I take something called skelettium also to calm me down. So I think a lot of my fears are just anxiety in the moment. But there's also just lots of pressure, I think, for women in the workplace and women in leadership positions that makes us shy away from the spotlight, right? So I think there's a lot that we can do to trust ourselves a lot more. And so, I think connection is everything, and especially connecting with oneself. And there's so many different ways that you can connect with yourself more. And I think when you can identify something like fear, you can better deal with it.
And you've talked about some of the things that we can do. You know how I go on about self-care and taking care of yourself and building a strong foundation of self-care. Based on what you just said now, tell me a little bit more about how you make time for yourself and care for yourself to support you to be able to be this impactful leader.
I think that's something I am not so great at. Self-care isn't central to what I do on a day-to-day. I center my work a lot more than self-care. And so having someone like you just really reminding me that I do need to take time for myself, that I think the words you used was scheduling my work around my well-being is always a good reminder to do that. I think what helps me feel on top of things is my morning routine, especially. I've gotten back into meditating and journaling, which is really helping connect with myself, but also vigorous exercise, I find, releases a lot of my tension and anxiety. So I do boxing and other high intensity exercise. I do yoga as well. So just daily exercise, I find, is a good way of self-care and connecting with people I love. So I have a partner in the home, and that makes it easy to make the connection every day, but also connecting with friends and making time for some fun every now and then, which I do need to do a lot more of.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about you in your work leadership role, because of course I know you also play leadership roles in other spaces. You were one of few organizations who secured a large project that will have massive social impact, but also that has a very high responsibility financially and otherwise for your organization. And this also in a time when other NGOs are really struggling to kind of just do what they need to do at a basic level. So for me, that says that there's something going right in your organization, and leadership, of course, for me speaks to that. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about which of your leadership skills have come to the fore in this scenario with this project, and what can you share about your learning journey with the project?
Hmm. So, just for everyone else's information, the project that you're speaking about is the Social Employment Fund,
Mm-hmm.
which is a part of the Presidential Employment Stimulus. So, we've elected to go with a project with the IDC. Really big project, lots of pressure that we are under to make it work. But firstly, I'll say before I get into the leadership skills that
Mm-hmm.
I'm generally a little bit of a learning junkie. I think earlier you described it, you said you're a hoarder of information. I think I'm a hoarder of information and knowledge. And so every time you see me or interact with me, I'm probably on some course or fellowship, or I have a coach, or I'm just simply reading about how to become a better leader. And of course, this can get exhausting and time consuming, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's necessary for our growth. So I think, when I think about specific leadership skills that have gotten us here as an organization, there's a few things that I've been part of in terms of my own personal and professional development that I can credit for driving our
Mm-hmm.
organization towards getting that social employment program. And there's three maybe that I'll mention. One is, I think, visionary leadership. So back in 2020, I worked for a whole year with a coach who really helped me to connect with my personal purpose
Mm-hmm.
and to set a vision for the after school sector, because it's not just a vision for the organization, but for
Mm-hmm.
the sector as a whole, because we see ourselves as having this kind of umbrella role in the sector. So to really start to expand my vision outside of the organization and into the sector and into what I want to see for South Africa is one of the kind of leadership things that I draw on. And then secondly, in 2021, I was also part of the Ashoka Changemaker series that introduced me to principles of systems change work and made
Mm-hmm.
me realize that it was time to stop playing small in our sector and that we needed to start targeting and even influencing public spend in education if we were to move the needle on education outcomes. And so I would say probably a deep sense of social responsibility is something that I think is key to leadership and is one of the factors that got us there. Um, yeah, so for me, it's not just about a sense of doing the right thing, but to do it for as many people as possible and extending access at scale and throughout the system. So I think that's a really critical leadership skill. And then thirdly, I'll say I think it's important that leaders show agility and a willingness to take risks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in order to be responsive and take advantage of opportunities that are out there. And this was always going to be big for us, the Social Employment Fund, lots of pressure to work with government. But I think if I hadn't been the kind of person that wants to take risks and test things out, we wouldn't have gone for it. And obviously COVID came with a lot of challenges, but I think also a lot of opportunities
Mm-hmm.
for the nonprofit sector. And as I said, we're fortunate to have this kind of helicopter view over the sector. And so we quickly saw the opportunity for after school to be recognized as a significant player in the education ecosystem. But for that to happen at scale in a systemic way, we realized also that we needed to adequately staff and capacitate our partners and organizations that we work with to take on that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So, with the advent of that presidential employment stimulus, it was a no-brainer that we would need to employ a lot more people in the sector, and especially young people who are unemployed, a lot of them, and so that we can support a lot more schools and learners to produce these learning outcomes. So, yeah, those are the things I think in terms of leadership skills.
Yeah, thanks. I also resonate with that. I think a lot of my life has been about risk taking. My friends often stress about me and my risk taking, but I feel that is what got me as far as I am because, I was willing to take risks to move forward.
Mm.
If you think about your leadership role now and your role when you were a manager, So, at a lower level, what advice would you give women who are at that management level wanting to move into kind of executive leadership roles? What is it that you would say is critical for them to either think about or do on that journey to executive leadership?
Hmm. I think, as you noted earlier today, there's quite a huge jump between management and leadership. And leadership is quite a big and strategic kind of responsibility, I think. And so to be thinking a lot broader and deeper than just your immediate space and your immediate organization, I think is so important. Because we're thinking about changing systems and not just changing people and organizations and sectors, right? So I think women need to trust themselves a lot more. I think the world teaches us that we have to compete with men, or probably tells us that, that men are better leaders. But it's also, understanding for ourselves and accepting that we don't need to prove ourselves to be, any better leaders than what men are, really, and so I think we need to stop waiting in the wings as women and rejecting these opportunities for executive elevation, as you call it. And I also think as you take the plunge, know that there are people out there that can support you. So getting coaching for me was a key part of growth, over and above all the professional development and leadership training and fellowships that I've been on. I think getting that one-on-one support and that person that is your ear and kind of support structure is critical to do. So if you don't necessarily immediately trust yourself to be a leader from a management position, I think if you can elect somebody in your life to walk that journey with you, you'd be doing yourself quite a big favor.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, I'm a coach, and so I will definitely agree with that. But my own life journey has also, been critical by having a coach in terms of my own development, my own growth. A coach has been instrumental. Different coaches for different purpose, and I truly believe in that. But one of the other things that I've also learned is that I have done a lot of different things outside my formal workspace that allows me to grow my leadership skills. So I asked my CEO in 1999 to nominate me to sit on a Technicon SA council at that point, which I had no clue about, but all I knew is I want to sit here and I feel I have a voice to contribute to tertiary education and to especially to women's advancement in tertiary education. And since then I've sat on different boards in different spaces, been a mentor, a volunteer for different things, and I feel that has contributed immensely to my leadership journey. Tell us a little bit about your other leadership roles and how you feel they have contributed to your leadership journey.
Yeah, I think I very similarly, I also take on a mentorship role for a lot of people. I've been exposed especially to a lot of young people that I have mentored over time. And I also sit on quite a few boards. And some of them are uncomfortable spaces to be, and they don't immediately make sense for where I'm trying to go necessarily with my career. But I'm always challenging myself to see what is the learning I can take from this. All right. So it's easy to sit on a nonprofit board of an organization that does similar work to what you do, but to sit on a board of a bank's foundation, for instance, and to interact with people that are leaders in business in their own sectors. I'm not the most financially astute person, but being connected to people that are auditors and CFOs that sit on similar boards helps me learn quite a bit. I also take on other leadership roles in my personal space. I was kind of a founding member in 2 women's investment groups. And I don't know what it is, but I always attract secretariat roles. So I'm a secretary for these investment groups. One of them has just restructured into a company, and we're trying to be quite an influential kind of group of women that do investments at a large scale, but also just to grow our own personal and collective wealth. And so that's been a really good source of learning for me, just about investments and finances, just generally. I also recently, with one of my mentees, started a Black women's leaders in NGOs group, and it operates almost like a brains trust, where we are a support structure for each other. We meet every 6 weeks, and we appoint one person to present a challenge that they're having in their organization, and we help brainstorm some solutions together for that particular challenge. And that's another source of learning, because we are all leaders in the NGO space and education, but we have so many varied kind of challenges, people that have boards that are over involved, for instance, which is not my experience necessarily, but in terms of board governance and how to handle your board and get the most out of them, I get a lot of these pointers from that group, for example.
And talk to me about why it's so important for us to have safe spaces for Black women leaders like the one you just mentioned.
I mean, there's many reasons, and all of us in that particular group, and there's only 6 of us now, but we've been part of another NGO leaders group. And I find that, every time somebody puts a WhatsApp message on that group about, can somebody suggest a finance manager, a consultant, a service provider for this, it's always white people. So I said to these women, we've got to build a database of Black service providers. If I'm looking for a Black researcher, I'd like another Black woman to suggest somebody that they've worked with. So just really starting to tap into the Black network, I think we can only really do with other Black women leaders. But I also think we face similar challenges and similar biases that perhaps if you are in a mixed race group, some of those things go kind of not understood. And I think with Black women leaders, it just feels a lot more natural and a lot more like we can identify with each other's challenges, and we can deal with them in a lot more honest way, right? We're not kind of walking on eggshells and trying to watch what we say, watch every word, So I think it's really important from a point of view of identifying with each other and each other's challenges and being responsive to those.
Yeah, agreed. I'm so impressed with that space. I think we just need so much more spaces where Black women can, safely be learning, growing together, but also having critical and engaging conversations. Thanks for sharing that. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone would like to ask Sibongile a question, please feel free to share it in the comments, and I'll try to address it before we finish. But I wanted to ask you about some of the lessons you've learned. Executive leadership is also one of lessons, and sometimes those lessons are quite tough. So tell me about one or two of those lessons that you've learned, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I think one is getting buy-in. I think people don't always operate at your level as a leader, right? You are kind of thinking about this stuff strategically and constantly. So you need to be consistently be bringing them along and into what's happening in your mind. And this is my constant source of frustration, if I'm honest. A lot lives in my head and in my heart, but I know I need to be generating that energy and passion outwardly to have it catch on with other people. And this is a lesson that I'm learning continuously. How do I get buy-in from my own team? Because I make assumptions about what they know and what they believe in and what they've bought into. So I need to consistently work with that. I think the second one is one we've mentioned before, and it's around personal well-being. I learned a very tough lesson about the importance of self-care um,
Mhm.
when my health deteriorated as a result of stress in the first quarter of this year. I even ended up in hospital. So this is another one that I'm needing to be reminded of constantly, I think. Just really
Mhm.
needing to disconnect from work and understanding that work will always be there and there'll always be pressure and it will never be finished.
Mhm.
And scheduling, as you say, my work around my well-being. But one more that I'll sneak in, I think, is just self-worth.
Mhm.
Is has been a really big lesson. That I don't have to prove that I'm worthy of the title. That I didn't get
Mhm.
elected into the executive director position to prove that I'm worthy of being the director. And to take time to settle into the responsibilities rather than rushing to prove that you can do it.
Mhm.
And to believe that I am competent and I do belong here, and that's why you've elected me to be here. So I think tough lessons in self-worth over time that, again, I'm continuously learning about.
Thanks so much. And that is an amazing note on which to end this conversation. Thanks, Sibongile, for being so open and honest, for sharing with us. And I appreciate you making the time and being here with me. To everybody that has joined the conversation, thank you so much. You can join us again next week for another conversation with an executive leader. If you have any questions or comments, you'd like to connect with myself or my guest, you can get in touch with us and we will follow up with you from there. Have a good evening and thanks for joining.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night.
Happy weekend. Bye.